as it's being reported, this is Trump's attempt to undermine climate policies, specifically Obama's climate policies, his regulations, and frankly, his legacy when it comes to his environmental legacy. But the entire performance yesterday was put forward as a way to bring coal jobs back, which, as we discussed yesterday, ain't happening, ain't gonna happen, since the world is now moving on from coal. And not because of some kind of Obama war on coal. I wish we had such a war on coal, but because natural gas is cheaper and cleaner when it comes to power plants. Coal cannot really compete on the free market, and the coal that is out there is increasingly mined by automation techniques that don't require as much manpower. And then there's the renewable energy revolution in solar and wind that is resulting in hundreds of thousands of good jobs. And nonetheless, since this is the Fox News administration, essentially a presidential Fox News show in the guise of a president, they're pretending that somehow Trump's signature is going to bring back coal mining. It's not. Here's a quick montage of the EPA's Administrator Scott Pruitt, who hates the EPA, Interior Secretary Ryan Zinke, Energy Secretary Rick Perry, who had no idea what the Energy Department did, and finally, Vice President Mike Pence, speaking before Trump's announcement and the signing of his so-called Energy Independence Executive Order yesterday ironically enough, at the Environmental Protection Agency.
Our nation can't run on pixie dust and hope. And the last 8 years showed that. I can tell you the hallmark of a great president is one that takes decisive action. And that's exactly what our president did.
The president, with his signature on that executive order, is going to set in motion government reforms designed to continue promoting clean air and water for the American people.
Coal jobs are the best jobs. And for some of our communities, coal jobs are the only jobs.
This is a great day for energy independence and a growing American economy, because the war on coal is over.
Oh, thank God. Thank God that war is over. Desi Doyen, coal jobs are the best jobs.
Yes.
Did you know that?
I know. That was he was quoting from a coal miner in a coal mining community. They don't have any other jobs because all of the efforts in the Congress, especially in a Republican-dominated Republican majority Congress, all of the efforts to put forth economic transition funding for coal country, for Appalachia, that's all been voted down by Republicans.
And there are many, many more jobs in solar and wind.
Oh, yeah. I think the latest statistic that I saw based on the Department of Energy is that renewable energy jobs outnumber fossil fuel jobs 2-to-1 these days.
At least.
And that's not because of regulations. It's because it's cheaper and it continues to fall in price, even now being below coal in the cost of electricity generation.
And people like it better. And it was amazing in that entire thing yesterday, Trump did not use the words climate, I don't think at all. Certainly not global warming.
Oh, he didn't.
He didn't. I don't think he mentioned solar. He didn't mention
not.
wind.
I watched
any
the whole
of that
thing.
stuff.
He said nothing. None of them said anything. They kept talking about energy independence, but yet they cut out the growing sector of energy independence, which is homegrown wind and solar.
Nonetheless, as we discussed yesterday, after seeing that entire fine affair, and frankly, after seeing the rest of the ways that Trump has tried and failed to do stuff, like his Muslim ban, repealing and replacing the dreaded Obamacare, I gotta say, I am somewhat less alarmed by what they are trying to do here, because they are not very good at it. They are just not good. They don't know what they are doing. They think that the stuff they told them on Fox News is actually true, is actually the way the world works. And they are learning piece by piece, policy by policy, that is not the case. Also, I am a little bit less worried today because, the folks who have been standing up against this administration. and whether it's the public or the courts. But here in particular, we've got environmentalists and legal experts who suggest overturning these regulations that, as Trump is trying to do, these regulations that took years to put in place, as based on existing legislation and in some cases court orders going back years. That itself is going to take years and may end up preventing these regulations from being reversed. They may, be stopped by the courts entirely. And by way of just one more example of the difficulty that the Trump administration is likely to face in rolling back many of these regulations from the Obama era, and by the way, from before the Obama era, from the George W. Bush era, frankly. Amanda Marcotte over at Salon writes that the administration's claims about getting the EPA back to its core mission by rolling back regulations, while at the same time, again, moving forward on energy production in the U.S., is, as Marcotte describes it, a bunch of nonsense. She writes, instead, the executive order is another example of the Trump administration's ignoring basic facts in service of a right-wing ideology rooted mostly in a blind, irrational hatred of Obama. Unfortunately for Trump, she says, undoing Obama's climate legacy will require more than a stroke of a pen. As Trump learned when he signed a half-baked order meant to fulfill his Muslim travel ban promise, there were scores of lawyers at the ready to challenge his efforts. That's even more true when facing down environmental groups, she argues. To make things even harder for Trump, environmental lawyers are backed by a heavy amount of legal precedent that has established that the EPA is required to do its job and that scientific evidence matters when it comes to environmental regulation. Not just due to common sense, by the way, but it actually matters in a court of law. All this executive order does, she says, is instruct federal agencies to reconsider existing rules. While there is no doubt that Pruitt would love to, that's Scott Pruitt, the EPA administrator who hates the EPA, while there's no doubt that Pruitt would love to gut rules designed to combat climate change, there are legal restraints on what he can do. And she gives one example here, a 1946 law requires courts to, quote, hold unlawful and set aside agency action, findings, and conclusions that are found to be arbitrary, capricious, and an abuse of discretion or otherwise not in accordance with law. Therefore, she quotes Vera Pardee, a senior counsel at the Center for Biological Diversity's Climate Law Institute, saying that Pruitt's justifications for rewriting Obama-era rules must be, quote, reasonable, non-arbitrary, non-capricious explanations as to why the reams and reams of scientific material gathered by the EPA under Obama to justify these rules somehow no longer apply. Because the new president says so, that doesn't count.
Yeah, that's not good enough.
So they're actually going to have to show that science was wrong and here's the right science, or otherwise give a reason to the courts for making these changes. That's very good. I think that may hold us in good stead. The biggest precedent, Marcotte notes, is the 2007 Supreme Court decision, which determined that the EPA, in about 2007, that was during George W. Bush, it determined that the EPA is required to regulate greenhouse gas emissions under the Clean Air Act, which defines any pollutant as something that can, quote, reasonably be anticipated to endanger public health or welfare. That case, she notes, was a response to the George W. Bush administration's attempt to wiggle out of its legal duty to regulate greenhouse gas emissions. Remember, Desi Doyen?
Oh, yeah.
Remember that email that they would not open from the EPA, that I guess that was the endangerment finding?
Yes, this was back when the Bush administration, EPA, went through a very laborious process that they tried to slow walk, and they finally could not declare that carbon dioxide was warming the planet and that
They could
global,
not
they
declare
could not determine
Okay.
that. They could not get away with trying to say that it wasn't happening. They couldn't get away with trying to say it wasn't going to impact human health. So they sent the email saying, okay, yeah, here it is. Here's our endangerment finding that climate change does endanger human health. And the Bush administration didn't open it. They waited until they left. And then the Obama administration EPA had to go through the whole process all over again. And they finally came to that conclusion.
And they didn't want to open it because they didn't want to be informed that, yes,
Right.
carbon was a danger.
that would-
Then they would have to take action on it.
Right, that would trigger them, requiring them to take legal action on it and regulatory action on it. The Supreme Court decision says if the EPA finds that it's an endangerment, then the EPA must regulate. So that's where the law is right now.
And Amanda Marcotte goes on to note that Trump's task then is to succeed where Bush failed. She says in 2008, the idea that someone could be worse than Bush at his job might have sounded like a high mountain to scale, but Trump has shown in just a few short months in office that it can be done.